Hello, and welcome to another tutorial for Amazon Lumberyard. This is going to be the first in a series of tutorials that teaches how to make Flappy Bird using Lumberyard. So go ahead and start up the editor. I'm using 1.7. I don't think there's anything that will not work if you're using 1.6 or below, but I just recommend upgrading to 1.7 because there's a whole bunch of improvements. Just even the amount of time it takes to load the editor. I mean, that would have taken like 3 times as long probably with 1.6. So go ahead and start a new level and call it Flappy Chicken. Now I recommend keeping the terrain, but just lowering the size, because it's nice to have a little bit of ground while we're doing stuff, but we don't really need to have it be as big as the default. So this tutorial is going to be one step, and it's going to show how to make the player character. So we're not going to worry about making the pipes or scores or anything like that. So all we have to do here is right click and create new component entity. If you're in 1.7, your entity outliner and your entity inspector are already up, which is good because those are what we're going to primarily be using. So go over here and name entity to player and give it a skinned mesh rendering component. Click on the ellipse here and you're going to find your chicken model. If you're using the samples project, it's going to be in the objects, character models, chicken CDF. And now we have our character model, which is pretty hilarious looking. And we're going to add another component right off. We're going to add character physics, and then we're going to open up FlowGraph and start adding some behavior. So to start off with, we're going to go add a start node, add an input.actionHandler node, and add a physics.actionImpulse node. So the first thing you're going to do is choose entity is going to be graph entity, and we're going to connect output to enable, and we're going to connect action pressed to activate. So the way this is going to work is at the start of the game, we're going to enable the action handler, which means every time the action is pressed, it's going to add an impulse to the player entity. So we have to set up a couple things. We have to make action map be player and action name be move forward. Now these aren't just things that you can make up on your own. This is actually from an external XML document that comes with the samples project. In the action map player, there's an action name move forward, which corresponds to the W key. So every time we push W, we're going to add a Z impulse of 1000 in the up direction because Z is up in Lumberyard. So you can close that. If you zoom out a little bit and then push Control G, you can see that every time you push the W key, your player gets a boost of basically anti-gravity, and then just like physics works, it eventually goes to 0 and then becomes negative and the player falls back to Earth. The only problem here is that there's no limiter, so you can just mash the W key as much as you want and he'll pretty much go up forever. So we don't want that. So go back into your flow graph and we are going to add a couple limiters to this. So first off, remove that, move that over to the side, and start off by doing a physics.dynamics node, a component entity transform component get entity position node, a math less node, and we're going to use 2 of those, and a vec3 from vec3, 2 of those as well. So the first one we're going to do is we're just going to check to make sure that the player is actually falling. So in this way, the only way the player will be able to push the W key and have it actually do something is if the player is already downward. So make that graph entity and just go ahead and do the other one just so we don't forget. Now the thing with physics dynamics is you don't actually have to connect anything to the enable. So we're just going to pull velocity straight into the vec3, and then the Z, which is the up down, is going to go to the math less. So we're checking right here if the Z velocity is less than 0. And if that's true, then we're going to do the impulse. And the only other thing we have to do here is action pressed needs to go to activate. So if we test this out, we can see that nothing happened because we're not going down. So grab the chicken, push the 2 button to go into your move tool, and move it up to something like 40. And And now you can see that every time the player is moving down, you can push it, but you can't push it when the player is still moving up. So that's a pretty good limit, but we're going to add a little bit more because we also don't want the player to go too high because we can currently still go off the screen. So break that again, and this on true is going to go to activate, get entity position. We're going to, just like we did before, get the position as a vector 3, and we're going to add the Z to A, and we're going to set the B to 40. So now this is going to check to make sure that the player is not only moving down, but is also underneath 40 in the Z position. And one other thing you have to make sure you do is Z needs to go to activate, as well as A. So when we start this off, we should be able to see the player can no longer go way off the screen. You can go off the screen a little bit, but that's just a simple matter of tweaking some numbers if you'd like. I'm okay with them going up a little bit. Now the one thing you may notice is if you're moving really quickly down, he doesn't really get much of a boost. One way to solve that is to go into the player dynamics and make air resistance. I found 2 is a pretty good number, so now he seems to go down at a much more constant rate, and then the boosts seem to have a lot better, more consistent effect. Alright, cool. So now that we have the controls pretty much set, we're going to add a little bit of animations just for a little bit of polish. So we're going to add a mannequin component and a mannequin scope context. So this is how what you put in here, you use these to control the animations with FlowGraph. So in the controller definition field, click the ellipse. Now you're going to find this in animations, mannequin, chicken, and you're going to look at the chicken controller defs.xml. And then in the mannequin scope context animation database, you're going to find this in the animations mannequin ADB. So now this is all stuff that's just comes with the samples project. I didn't write the controller defs or the chicken anims or do any animation. This is all just out of the box. But now it's set up that he has a suite of animations that we can use. So open up FlowGraph again. And now down here where it's action impulse, we're also going to add an actor play mannequin fragment. Make sure that says graph entity. On true is also going to play, and the fragment is going to be jump. Again, this isn't just some magic thing that you make it, you just put jump into any object and it'll work. This is something that's already been done in the chicken character in the samples project. So now if we go back in, every time we push the button, the player is going to do his flapping animation. So that's just a little something to make it look nice. Alright, so now the last thing we want to do, because if we just did this and we called this good, when you tried playing the game in the project launcher, it would probably look like this, because there's no camera. So we are going to create one more component, entity. We're going to call this camera. And now camera is going to have a surprise camera component. Just make sure that it's rotated the correct direction and it's facing the player, and you're probably going to want to move it up a little bit or else you're just going to see water. And just kind of get it in a space that you can see what you're doing. That seems to be pretty good. Now we're far from a complete game at this point, and again, if you're on the ground you can't do anything. That's okay, because in the next video we're going to show how to make pipes that move across the screen, and we're going to make it so you get a game over when you hit the ground. So before we do that, let's go to File, Save, and Export to Engine. Then we can just close this for a little bit and open up the samples project just so we can test. Now we don't actually have anything set up on the main menu currently to make you go to that level, but luckily we have the power of console commands. So once this loads, push the tilde key, which is right above the tab key, type in map, and Flappy chicken. And there we have Flappy chicken. Now, there's no, like in the editor, if you push escape key, it leaves. There's nothing like this in here, so you have to go either Alt F4 or tilde quit. Alright, so that's how to make the player controller. So the next episode of this series is going to show how to make the pipe obstacles. So thank you for watching, and I hope that was useful.